The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. Last chance! Anybody? She eats almost nothing! 3-year-old Rosie stood frozen on the wooden platform, clutching a torn teddy bear to her chest. Her bare feet were bleeding, her dress was nothing but rags, and her enormous brown eyes held no tears, because she'd learned long ago that crying only made the beatings worse. Worthless, someone muttered. Too small, too much trouble. Then boots struck wood. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, and every head turned. Before we follow Nate and Rosie's journey, please subscribe and stay until the very end. Comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. The summer heat pressed down on Silver Creek like a punishment from God. Nathaniel Holloway wiped sweat from his brow and cursed under his breath. He'd come to town for one reason: to buy a stallion from the Garrett farm. Nothing more, nothing complicated, just business, the way he liked it. 4 years of keeping to himself. 4 years of running the biggest horse ranch in Montana Territory without letting anyone get close. 4 years since Clara died in his arms, their newborn son following 3 days later. He'd built walls so high around his heart that even his own foreman called him a ghost walking among the living. "Nate, over here!" Jake Turner waved from across the dusty street, his weathered face splitting into a grin. "Thought you said you wasn't coming to town till next week." "Changed my mind." Nate kept walking toward the livery stable. "Garrett's got that gray stallion. Figured I'd take a look before someone else snatches him up." "Garrett ain't here today." Jake fell into step beside him. "Whole town's at the placement fair." Nate stopped dead. "The what?" "Orphan auction. Train came in yesterday with a whole load of 'em from back east." Jake spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Farmers looking for cheap labor, mostly. Some families wanting babies. That's none of my concern." "Didn't say it was." Jake studied him with knowing eyes. "But you might want to avoid the town square if you don't want to see it. They're wrapping up the last few." Nate should have listened. Should have turned around, gone back to the ranch, waited another week for that stallion. But something pulled him forward. Maybe curiosity, maybe fate. Maybe the ghost of Clara whispering in his ear. The town square was packed despite the brutal heat. Women fanned themselves with handkerchiefs. Men mopped their faces with bandanas. Children darted between legs, bored with the proceedings. On a wooden platform at the center stood a man in a sweat-stained suit, his voice hoarse from hours of calling out bids. "Come now, folks, she's the last one. Surely someone needs a little helper around the house." Nate pushed through the crowd until he could see the platform clearly, and his heart stopped. A child stood there, tiny, 3 years old at most, though she was so thin she could have been younger. Her hair was blonde, but matted with dirt, hanging in tangles around a face that was all eyes. Huge brown eyes that stared at nothing and everything at once. She wore a dress that was more holes than fabric. Her feet were bare and bleeding from standing on the rough wood. In her arms, she clutched a teddy bear so worn its stuffing poked through a dozen tears. She didn't cry, didn't move, just stood there like a little statue, waiting for whatever came next. "Come on!" the auctioneer's voice took on a desperate edge. "She eats almost nothing. Won't be no burden at all. Just needs a roof and some scraps." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A farmer in the front shook his head. "Too small for any real work. Be years before she's useful." "I ain't running a charity," another man called out. "What good's a runt like that?" A woman near Nate tutted to her husband. "Poor little thing. But we've already got 4 mouths to feed. Can't take on another." "Damaged goods," someone muttered behind Nate. "You can see it in her eyes. Something's broken in that one." The auctioneer mopped his forehead, clearly running out of options. "All right, folks. If nobody wants her, She goes back to the orphanage in Helena. They'll find some use for her, I reckon." Nate knew what that meant. Everyone knew. The Helena orphanage was a workhouse in everything but name. Children went in, and if they came out at all, they came out broken. He should walk away. This wasn't his problem. He had a ranch to run, horses to breed, a life carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of complication. The little girl on the platform shifted her weight, and Nate saw her wince. Her feet were worse than he'd thought. Not just dirty, but cut and bruised. She'd probably walked miles in those bare feet. Still, she didn't cry. Something about that hit Nate harder than tears would have. This child had learned that crying brought no comfort, had learned to endure pain in silence, had learned, at 3 years old, that the world offered her nothing but hurt. "Going once," the auctioneer called. "Going twice." Wait. The word left Nate's mouth before his brain caught up. Every head in the crowd swiveled toward him. "Mr. Holloway?" The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "Did you say something?" Nate's boots hit the platform with authority, his long stride eating up the distance between himself and the child. She flinched at his approach, pressing the teddy bear tighter against her chest. But she didn't run. Didn't have anywhere to run to, he supposed. "How much?" His voice came out rougher than intended.
Mr. Holloway, sir, this is highly irregular. A man in your position—"
I asked, "How much?" The auctioneer's eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Nate. "The standard placement fee is $5, but—" Nate pulled out his wallet, counted out $50, 10 times the asking price, and slapped it on the podium. "That should cover the fee and then some. Papers, now." The crowd erupted in whispers. "Holloway's lost his mind. What's a bachelor rancher want with a little girl? Ain't natural, a man his age taking in a child like that." Nate ignored them all. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the girl. Up close, she was even more pitiful. Cheeks hollow, arms like twigs, dark circles under those enormous eyes. "Hey there," he said quietly, keeping his voice soft. "What's your name?" She stared at him without answering. Her grip on the teddy bear tightened. "That your friend?" Nate nodded toward the bear. "He got a name?" Still nothing, but something flickered in her eyes, a tiny spark of, not trust exactly, curiosity maybe. "I'm Nate." He stayed crouched, making himself as small and non-threatening as he could. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles from here. Lots of horses. You ever seen a horse up close?" The smallest shake of her head. "They're real gentle, most of them. Soft noses, like to be petted." Nate reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and touched the teddy bear's worn head with one finger. "Softer than this little fella, even." The girl looked down at his hand on her bear, then back up at his face, searching, evaluating. God, she was smart. He could see it in those eyes, a sharp intelligence that had learned to assess threats, to read danger, to survive. "Mr. Holloway!" The auctioneer thrust papers into his field of vision. "If you'll just sign here—" "In a minute." Nate didn't look away from the child. "I'm talking to her." "She don't talk much," the auctioneer said nervously. "Hasn't said more than a word or two since she arrived. The orphanage matron said she's simple-minded, but I think she's just—" "I didn't ask for your opinion." Nate's voice cut like a whip, and the auctioneer retreated hastily. He turned back to the girl. "I'm going to pick you up now, all right? Going to take you somewhere safe, somewhere with food and a real bed, and nobody who'll hurt you." She studied him for a long moment. Then, so slightly he almost missed it, she nodded. Nate scooped her up with a gentleness that surprised even himself. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones and fear wrapped in rags. Her small body went rigid in his arms, every muscle tensed for pain, that didn't come. "It's okay," he murmured against her matted hair. "You're okay now." He signed the papers one-handed, while the auctioneer babbled about procedures and proper channels. The crowd parted before him as he walked through, their whispers following like gnats. "Scandal! Poor child. What's he thinking?" "Reverend Whitmore ain't gonna like this." Nate's jaw tightened at that last one. Whitmore. The sanctimonious bastard who ran the local orphanage and preached charity while children starved in his care. If he'd had any sense, Nate would have punched the man years ago. Jake was waiting by the wagon, eyes wide. "Nate, what in the—" "Not now." Nate settled the girl on the wagon seat, careful of her injured feet. "We're going home." "You just bought a child." "I know what I did." Nate climbed up beside her, gathered the reins. "You coming or staying?" Jake scrambled up onto his own horse, sputtering questions that Nate ignored. The girl sat perfectly still as the wagon rattled out of town, her bear pressed against her chest, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. She hadn't made a sound since Nate picked her up. Once they cleared the town limits, Nate let himself breathe. The summer heat had mellowed into something almost bearable, the grasslands stretching gold and green toward the distant mountains. "What's your bear's name?" he asked again, softer now that they were alone. Silence stretched between them. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "Biscuit." Nate's heart clenched. Her voice was raspy from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but she'd spoken. "Biscuit," he repeated. "That's a good name. Strong name." She looked up at him then, really looked, those brown eyes searching his face for something. Deception, maybe. The lie that always came before the pain. "He's my friend," she whispered. "I can see that." Nate kept his eyes on the road, giving her space. "You been together long?" "Mama gave him." A pause. "Before she went to sleep." Went to sleep. Nate understood. Kids that age didn't have words for death, just gentle euphemisms that adults taught them. "I'm sorry about your mom." The girl didn't respond, just tucked Biscuit under her chin and watched the landscape roll by. They rode in silence for a while. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, the main house, solid and sprawling, the barns and corrals, the pastures dotted with horses like scattered jewels. "That's home," Nate said, pointing. The girl's eyes went wide. "Big." "Yeah." He almost smiled. "Too big for just me, honestly. Gets real quiet." She absorbed this information, her brow furrowing in thought. "You live alone?" "For now. Got some folks who help with the horses in the house. But at night, yeah, just me." "Lonely?" The question hit him somewhere deep. 3 years old, and she understood loneliness better than most adults. "Sometimes," he admitted. She considered this, then, so quietly he wasn't sure he heard right. "Me too." The wagon pulled up to the main house, and before Nate could climb down, the front door burst open. "Nathaniel Holloway!" A woman in her late 50s stormed down the porch steps, gray hair escaping from her bun, flour on her apron. "Jake's boy rode ahead and told me, what in heaven's name have you done?" "Martha." Nate lifted the girl down from the wagon seat, keeping his movement slow and gentle. "I need your help." Martha Jenkins had been running the Holloway household for 20 years. First for Nate's father, now for Nate. She'd nursed him through fevers, boxed his ears for misbehavior, held him while he sobbed after Clara's funeral. She was the closest thing he had to a mother. Now she stood frozen on the bottom step, her sharp eyes taking in the tiny child in his arms, the rags, the bleeding feet, the haunted expression. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed. "What have they done to this baby?" "Nothing good." Nate shifted Rosie in his arms. "She needs food, a bath, clean clothes. and someone to look at those feet. Martha's face transformed from shock to fierce determination in the space of a heartbeat. Bring her inside, now. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Martha heated water for a bath, while Nate sat with the girl in the kitchen, coaxing her to eat small bites of bread and cheese. She ate like she expected the food to be taken away at any moment, fast, barely chewing, watching the door for threats. "Slow down, little one." Nate gently touched her arm. "Nobody's going to take it from you. There's plenty more where that came from." She froze, a piece of cheese halfway to her mouth, staring at him with naked disbelief. "I promise," he said. "Eat all you want. If you're still hungry after, Martha will make you more." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of hope. A tiny crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "The bath's ready," Martha called from upstairs. The girl's whole body went rigid. Her eyes darted toward the door, the windows, any possible escape route. "Hey," Nate crouched down to her level. "It's just a bath. Warm water, maybe some soap that smells nice. Martha will be gentle, I promise." "No!" The word came out sharp, terrified. "No bath, please!" Nate's gut twisted. What had they done to this child that made her fear simple things like water? "Okay," he said softly. "No bath tonight. Maybe tomorrow, when you're ready. How's that sound?" She stared at him, clearly waiting for the catch. The punishment. The anger that always followed defiance. When none came, she nodded slowly. "Good." Nate stood, offered her his hand. "Let's go find you a room then. Somewhere you can sleep." She didn't take his hand, but she followed him, a small shadow trailing behind, her bear clutched tight. Martha met them in the hallway, her expression carefully neutral despite the questions burning in her eyes. "I've got the blue room ready. It's small, but it's got a nice window." "Perfect." Nate led the way, the girl's bare feet padding silently on the hardwood. The room was simple, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, a window that looked out over the east pasture. Clean, safe. More space than this child had probably ever called her own. She stood in the doorway, not entering. "This is yours," Nate said. "All of it. Nobody else's." She looked at him, then at Martha, then at the room. Her bottom lip trembled. "Mine?" "Yours." She walked in slowly, touching the quilt with one tentative finger. Then the dresser. Then the window, pressing her palm flat against the glass like she needed to confirm it was real. "Biscuit too?" she asked, holding up the bear. "Biscuit too." Something in her face crumpled. Not sadness exactly, but the release of tension held too long, walls starting to crack. She sat down on the bed, very carefully, as if expecting it to disappear. Then she looked up at Nate with those enormous eyes. What's your name again?" "Nate. Nathaniel, really, but everyone calls me Nate." "Nate," she repeated, testing it. You won't make me go back?" The question broke something in him. "No." He crouched down, meeting her eyes directly. "I won't make you go back. This is your home now, understand?" She studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie. When she didn't find one, she nodded slowly. "Okay." One word, but it was enough. Martha appeared with a glass of milk and a clean nightgown 3 sizes too big. "Let's get you changed, little one. That dress needs burning." The girl flinched at the approach, but allowed Martha to help her change, her tiny body revealing the truth of her suffering, ribs visible beneath paper-thin skin, bruises in various stages of healing, and on her back. Martha made a sound like she'd been punched. Nate saw the scars. Old ones, faded to silver. Newer ones, still pink and raw. Whip marks. On a 3-year-old. He turned away, walked out of the room before he said something that would frighten the child. Walked all the way downstairs and out the back door and stood in the yard with his hands shaking, fury burning through his veins like wildfire. Someone had beaten this baby, repeatedly, systematically. And Nate was going to find out who. Martha found him an hour later, still standing in the yard, staring at nothing.
"She's asleep," Martha said softly. "Took her a while. She wouldn't close her eyes until I promised to leave the lamp burning."
The scars on her back.
"I know."
Martha's voice was tight with controlled rage.
"I saw."
"I'm going to kill someone." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "Not tonight, you're not." Martha put her hand on his arm. "Tonight you're going to sit with me and figure out how to help that child. Because she needs help, Nate. More than just a bed and food." "What do you mean?"
"She didn't just learn not to cry," Martha said quietly. "She learned not to exist. To take up as little space as possible.
To never ask for anything, never want anything, never expect anything. That kind of learning doesn't just go away." Nate thought about the way the girl had moved through the house, silent, careful, always watching. The way she'd flinched at every sudden sound. The way she'd eaten like someone might steal the food from her hands. "So what do we do?" "We give her time." Martha squeezed his arm. "We show her, over and over, that this is different, that we won't hurt her, that she's allowed to want things, to need things, to be a child." She paused. "And we find out her name. She hasn't told us that yet." Nate nodded slowly. "I'll talk to the auctioneer tomorrow. Find out where she came from, who had her before."
"And the town is going to talk."
"Let them."
"Reverend Whitmore won't be pleased. A single man taking in a little girl?"
"Reverend Whitmore can go to hell." Martha smiled grimly.
"I was hoping you'd say that."
She turned toward the house, then paused.
"Nate, what you did today, Clara would have been proud."
He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat, just nodded. Later that night, Nate sat in the chair outside the girl's room, listening to her breathe. She'd whimpered in her sleep a few times, and he'd heard Martha go in to soothe her. Around midnight, a soft voice drifted through the door.
"Nate?"
He was inside before he'd made a conscious decision to move. The girl sat up in bed, her bear clutched to her chest, moonlight streaming through the window and painting silver tracks down her cheeks. Tears. Finally. "Hey," he sat carefully on the edge of the bed, keeping distance between them. "Bad dream?" She nodded, her breath hitching. "Want to tell me about it?"
"The dark room."
Her voice was barely audible.
"They put me in the dark room when I was bad."
Nate's hands clenched into fists, hidden at his sides. "There's no dark room here. No punishment rooms, no bad places. You understand?" She looked up at him, those enormous eyes glistening. "Promise?" "I promise." He reached out slowly, gave her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you ever again." She studied his face in the moonlight, searching for truth. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because her body relaxed slightly.
"Rosie,"
she whispered. "What?"
"My name."
She hugged Biscuit tighter.
"I'm Rosie."
Something warm bloomed in Nate's chest. Something he hadn't felt in 4 years. "Rosie," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name." She almost smiled. Almost. "Go back to sleep, Rosie. I'll be right outside if you need me."
"You won't leave?" I won't leave. She lay back down, pulling the quilt up to her chin, her bear tucked securely beside her. Her eyes stayed fixed on Nate until sleep finally claimed her again. He sat in that chair until dawn broke over the mountains, watching over a child who'd somehow, impossibly, cracked through walls he'd spent 4 years building. And for the first time since Clara died, Nathaniel Holloway felt something other than empty. He felt afraid. Afraid of how much this tiny girl already meant to him. Afraid of what he'd do if anyone tried to take her away. Afraid of the future stretching out before them, uncertain, terrifying, and full of more hope than he'd allowed himself to feel in years. But more than that, he felt determined. Rosie had spent her whole short life being unwanted, being hurt, being told she wasn't worth the trouble. That ended today. From this moment forward, she would know every single day that someone had chosen her, that someone had looked at her standing alone on that platform and decided she was worth everything. Nate didn't know how to be a father, didn't know the first thing about raising a little girl, but he knew how to protect what was his, and Rosie was his now. God help anyone who tried to change that. The first week tested Nate in ways he never expected. Rosie didn't speak much. She followed him around the ranch like a silent shadow, always 3 steps behind, always watching. When he turned too quickly, she flinched. When he raised his voice to call Jake across the yard, she disappeared behind the nearest door. Martha had warned him. Patience, she'd said. Time. But watching a 3-year-old child live in constant fear nearly broke him. She ain't eaten enough. Martha cornered him in the kitchen on the 3rd morning. Takes a few bites, then stops, like she's waiting for permission. Give her permission, then. I have. Doesn't help. Martha's face was drawn with worry. She's been taught that food is earned, Nate, that she don't deserve it unless she works for it. Nate's jaw tightened. She's 3 years old. I know. He found Rosie in the barn later that morning, standing frozen in front of a stall. Inside, a mare named Honey nuzzled her newborn foal. That's Honey, Nate said softly, coming to stand beside her. Had her baby 2 days ago. Little filly. Rosie didn't respond, but her eyes were fixed on the foal with something close to wonder. You want to touch her? The tiniest nod. Nate opened the stall door, spoke quietly to Honey, then lifted Rosie up and held her close to the foal. The baby horse sniffed at Rosie's outstretched hand, soft nose bumping against tiny fingers. Soft. The word came out barely audible. Real soft. Yeah. Nate's voice caught. Real soft. Rosie turned to look at him, and for the first time, something other than fear flickered in her eyes. What's her name? Don't have one yet. Nate set her down gently. Maybe you could help me think of one. She considered this seriously. Buttercup? Buttercup, he nodded. I like it. Buttercup it is. That night, Rosie ate half her dinner without being coaxed. A small victory, but Nate held on to it like treasure. The nightmares came every night without fail. Nate learned to sleep light, listening for the whimpers that meant Rosie was trapped in darkness again. Sometimes Martha got there first. Sometimes Nate did. On the 4th night, he found her not in bed, but huddled in the corner of her room, biscuit pressed against her face. Rosie? He crouched down slowly. What happened? The thunder. Her voice shook. It sounds like him. Like who? The man with the belt. Nate's blood ran cold. What man, sweetheart? But she wouldn't say more, just pressed herself further into the corner, making her body as small as possible. Nate sat down on the floor beside her, not touching, just present. The thunder can't hurt you, he said quietly. It's just noise. Big, loud noise. But that's all it is. He said that too. Rosie's whisper was barely audible. Before he hurt me. Something inside Nate shattered. I'm not him. He kept his voice steady with effort. I will never hurt you, Rosie. Never. You understand? She looked up at him, those enormous eyes searching his face in the darkness. How do I know? The question pierced him. How could he prove something that had to be shown over time? How could he make a broken child believe in safety she'd never experienced? You don't, he admitted. Not yet. But I'm going to show you. Every single day. And maybe one day you'll believe me. The thunder cracked again. Rosie flinched, but didn't hide her face. Can you stay? I'll stay as long as you need. He stayed until dawn, his back against the wall, while Rosie eventually drifted off with her head against his arm. Martha found them there in the morning and had to turn away to hide her tears. Tommy Jenkins arrived on the 5th day, Martha's 10-year-old grandson, visiting for the summer. He burst through the front door like a small tornado, all energy and noise. Rosie vanished. Where'd she go? Tommy looked around, confused. Grandma said there was a little girl. You scared her. Nate headed for the stairs. Stay here. He found Rosie under her bed, pressed against the wall, trembling. Hey. He lay down on his stomach so he could see her. It's okay. That's just Tommy. He's loud, but he's harmless. He yelled. He's excited. Boys his age are like that. Nate held out his hand. Come on out. I'll introduce you properly. She didn't move. Rosie, his voice gentled. Nobody in this house will hurt you. Not me, not Martha, not Tommy. I promise. Slowly, painfully, she crawled out from under the bed. Her whole body was shaking. Nate scooped her up, and for the first time, she didn't go rigid in his arms. She leaned into him instead, her face pressed against his neck. Progress. The introduction went better than expected. Tommy, under strict instructions from Martha, approached Rosie like she was a skittish horse. Hi, he crouched down to her level. I'm Tommy. I'm 10. What's your name? Rosie pressed closer to Nate's leg, but answered. Rosie. That's a nice name, Tommy grinned. You ever seen baby horses before? A tiny nod. Cool. You want to come see him with me? Buttercup's getting bigger every day. Rosie looked up at Nate, seeking permission. Go ahead, he said. I'll be right here if you need me. She hesitated, then took Tommy's offered hand. He led her toward the barn, chattering about horses and summer and everything a 10-year-old found interesting. Martha appeared beside Nate, watching them go. That boy's got a gift with wounded creatures. Let's hope it works on this one. By the end of the day, Tommy had coaxed Rosie's first laugh out of her. A small, rusty sound, like something that hadn't been used in too long. Nate heard it from across the yard and had to sit down. You all right, boss? Jake materialized beside. Fine. Nate cleared his throat. Just fine. Jake followed his gaze to where Tommy was showing Rosie how to make a horse out of hay and twine. She's coming around. Slowly. That's how it works with the broken ones. Jake sat down on the fence rail. Knew a horse once. Beaten so bad he wouldn't let nobody near him. Took 2 years before he'd trust a human again. But when he did, Jake shook his head. Most loyal animal I ever worked with. She's not a horse, Jake. No, but hurt's hurt, and healing takes what it takes. On the 7th day, Nate decided it was time to take Rosie into town. She needed proper clothes, shoes that fit, maybe a toy or two that wasn't falling apart at the seams. The moment they crossed the town limits, he knew it was a mistake. People stared, whispered, pointed. There he is, a woman hissed to her companion. The one who bought that orphan girl like she was livestock. Shameful, the other woman agreed.
A bachelor living alone with a child. What kind of example is that? Rosie's hand tightened around Nate's fingers. She'd heard. Ignore them, Nate said quietly. They don't know anything. But the whispers followed them through the general store, the dress shop, the cobbler's. By the time Nate had purchased everything Rosie needed, his jaw ached from clenching. And then they ran into Harriet Price. The widow stood in the doorway of the millinery shop, her black dress immaculate, her expression poisonous. "Mr. Holloway," her voice dripped with false concern, "and this must be the poor little creature you've acquired." "Mrs. Price," Nate's tone was flat. "If you'll excuse us." "I'm simply concerned for the child's welfare." Harriet's eyes swept over Rosie with something that made Nate's skin crawl. "A man of your situation surely can't provide the proper feminine guidance a young girl requires." "She's got Martha." "A servant?" Harriet sniffed. "Hardly appropriate. Now, if you were to consider other options." "I'm not. The Whitmore Home for Children provides excellent—" "No." Harriet's facade cracked slightly. "Really, Mr. Holloway, your stubbornness is unbecoming. The child would be much better served by—" "The child," Nate interrupted coldly, "has a name, and she's not going anywhere." He swept past Harriet, Rosie's hand still gripped tightly in his. But Rosie had gone pale. Her steps faltered as they approached the wagon. "Rosie?" Nate crouched down. "What's wrong?" She looked at me." "Mrs. Price? Don't mind her. She's just a bitter old—" "No." Rosie's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "She looked at me like the other lady did, at the orphanage, before the bad things happened." Nate's blood turned to ice. "What lady? What bad things?" But Rosie had shut down, retreating into herself, her eyes going blank and distant. He lifted her into the wagon, his mind racing. The orphanage. Harriet Price. The way Harriet had looked at Rosie, assessing, calculating. Something was very, very wrong. That night, after Rosie was asleep, Nate sat with Martha and Jake in the kitchen. "I need to know everything about Harriet Price," he said grimly. "And her connection to the Helena orphanage." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "There's been talk. Nothing confirmed, but—" "Talk about what?" "Widow Price lost most of her money when her husband died. Everyone knows she's barely keeping that big house running." Jake paused. "Rumor is she's been acquiring help." "Help?" "Children." Martha's voice was hard. "From the orphanages. Calls them wards, but they're workers. Unpaid. Barely fed. And when they're old enough to leave—" She trailed off. "Where do they go?" Silence. "Martha, nobody knows." She met Nate's eyes. "That's the problem. Nobody knows where they go." Nate felt sick. "And Whitmore? The Reverend?" "Runs the local orphanage," Jake said. "Feeds into the one in Helena. Word is he and Mrs. Price have an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where children who nobody wants end up wherever pays the most." Nate stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. "And they put Rosie on that platform. They would have—" "You stopped it." Martha grabbed his arm. "You stepped in before it could happen." "But how many others didn't get that chance?" Nate was pacing now, fury and horror warring in his chest. "How many children have they—" "You can't save them all, Nate." "I can try." "And lose Rosie in the process?" Martha's voice was sharp. "You go after Whitmore and Price, they'll come after you. They'll say you're unfit. They'll take her back." The words stopped Nate cold. "They can't. They can try. And in this town, where you've got no wife, no standing with the church, no allies except hired hands and an old woman?" Martha shook her head. "You pick a fight now, you might lose everything."
Nate's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed of him to do something, to expose these monsters, to protect every child they'd ever hurt. But Rosie's face swam before his eyes. Rosie, who was just starting to smile. Rosie, who'd finally stopped flinching at loud noises. Rosie, who trusted him. What do I do? For now, you protect your girl. You build your case. You find allies. Martha's voice softened. And you pray they don't move first. The next morning brought trouble. Nate was in the barn with Rosie, showing her how to brush Buttercup, when Jake came running. "Rider coming in fast. Looks official." Nate's stomach dropped. "Take Rosie to Martha, now." "But the horsey," Rosie started. "I know, sweetheart. We'll come back. But right now, I need you to go with Jake, okay?" Something in his voice must have scared her. She nodded quickly and let Jake lead her away. Nate walked out to meet the rider, a young man in a deputy's uniform, sweating and uncomfortable. "Mr. Holloway?" The deputy dismounted, pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "Got papers for you, from Reverend Whitmore." Nate took the envelope, broke the seal. His vision went red. "What is it, boss?" Jake had returned, standing at a careful distance. Nate's voice came out like gravel. "It's a summons. Whitmore is challenging the adoption. Says I obtained Rosie through improper channels. He wants her returned to the orphanage pending review." "He can't do that. You paid. You signed papers." Apparently those papers weren't valid. Nate crumpled the summons in his fist. "The auctioneer didn't have authority to place children. That's Whitmore's job." "That's horseshit. The auction happens every year, and every year Whitmore looks the other way because he gets a cut." Nate was already striding toward the house, but I took something he'd already promised to someone else. Mrs. Price. Mrs. Price. Martha met them at the door, Rosie hiding behind her skirts. "What's happened?" Nate couldn't answer, couldn't look at Rosie and tell her that the safety he'd promised might be ripped away. Martha took one look at his face and understood. "Rosie, honey, go play with Tommy in the kitchen. There's cookies." "But—" "Now, sweetheart." Rosie went, but not before casting one terrified glance at Nate. When she was gone, Nate handed Martha the crumpled summons. She read it, and her face went white. "When?" 2 weeks. There's a hearing at the courthouse." "Can we fight it?" "I don't know." Nate's voice was hollow. "I need a lawyer, someone who isn't in Whitmore's pocket." "There's William Hart," Jake offered. "New in town. Young, idealistic, hasn't been corrupted yet. Get him, today." Jake nodded and was gone. Martha caught Nate's arm. "You can't let her see you like this. She'll know something's wrong." "Something is wrong." "But she don't need to feel it. Not yet." Martha's grip tightened. "You go in there, you put a smile on your face, and you tell that little girl everything's fine. You hear me?" Nate took a deep breath, then another. When he finally walked into the kitchen, his face was calm. "Hey, sweetheart." He crouched down beside Rosie's chair. "Having a good cookie?" She nodded, but her eyes were worried. "You look scared. Outside." God, this child missed nothing. "Grown-up stuff," Mate said lightly. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Is someone going to take me away?" The question hit him like a punch. "No." He took her small hand in his. "Nobody's taking you anywhere." "Promise?" He should have hesitated, should have been honest about the uncertainty, but looking into those trusting brown eyes, Nate couldn't do it. "I promise." Rosie searched his face for a long moment. Then she nodded and went back to her cookie. But when Nate stood up, Martha was watching him with knowing eyes. They both understood the weight of what he'd just sworn, and they both knew that keeping that promise might cost him everything. William Hart arrived that afternoon, a young man with wire-rimmed spectacles and an earnest face that made him look even younger than his 25 years. "Mr. Holloway." He shook Nate's hand firmly. "I've heard about your situation." "Then you know I need help."
I know Whitmore thinks he can bully you into giving up that little girl. William's jaw set. I also know he's been running crooked for years. Nobody's had the guts to challenge him. Will you? That's why I came to Silver Creek. William pulled papers from his satchel. I've been building a case, gathering testimony from former orphans, tracking financial irregularities. Whitmore's dirty, Mr. Holloway. He and Mrs. Price both. Hope flickered in Nate's chest. Can you prove it? Not yet. But if we can delay this hearing, buy some time. William met his eyes. I think we can take them down and protect Rosie in the process. Nate looked toward the house, where Rosie was visible through the window, playing some game with Tommy that involved Biscuit and a lot of giggling. Whatever it takes, he said. Whatever it costs. Even if it makes you enemies? Even if this town turns against you? Nate's answer came without hesitation. She's worth it. William nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. 3 days later, Reverend Whitmore came to the ranch himself. Nate met him on the porch, deliberately blocking the door. Reverend. His voice was ice. Mr. Holloway. Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. I thought perhaps we could discuss this situation like civilized men. There's nothing to discuss. Now. Whitmore spread his hands in false conciliation. I'm sure we can reach an arrangement. The child needs proper care, proper guidance. She's getting both. From a bachelor rancher? Whitmore's tone sharpened. Come now. You know as well as I do that a man in your position can't provide what a young girl needs. And what does a young girl need, Reverend? To be sold to the highest bidder? To be beaten until she's afraid of her own shadow? Something flickered in Whitmore's eyes. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The scars on her back say otherwise. Silence. That child came to me damaged, Whitmore said finally. Whatever happened to her occurred before she entered my care. Convenient. It's the truth. Whitmore stepped closer, his voice dropping. Mr. Holloway, let me be frank. You have no wife, no family, no standing in this community. You've isolated yourself for years, and now you expect people to believe you're suited to raise a child? I don't care what people believe. You should, because in 2 weeks, a judge will decide whether you're fit to keep that girl. And I promise you, my testimony will be thorough. Nate stepped forward until they were nearly chest to chest. Threaten me all you want, Reverend. Come after me with everything you've got. But know this, if you try to take that little girl, I will burn your whole operation to the ground. Every crooked deal, every missing child, every cent you've taken from suffering families. Whitmore's face went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Whitmore stepped back, adjusting his collar. I see we understand each other. We do. I'll see you at the hearing, Mr. Holloway. He walked away, and Nate watched until he disappeared down the road. When he turned around, Rosie was standing in the doorway. Was that the bad man? She whispered. Nate crouched down, gathered her into his arms. He's not going to hurt you, sweetheart. Not ever again. But he wants to take me away. He wants to. He won't. Rosie pulled back, her small hands framing his face. You're scared, she said. I can tell. Nate's throat tightened. Maybe a little. Don't be. She pressed her forehead against his. You're brave. Braver than anyone. What makes you say that? Because you saved me. Her voice was fierce despite its smallness. And people who save people are the bravest of all. Nate held her tighter, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He'd spent 4 years building walls. 4 years convinced that caring meant losing, that love meant pain. And now a 3-year-old girl was teaching him that some things were worth the risk.
That night, for the first time since Clara died, Nate prayed. Not for himself, for Rosie. For the chance to keep the promise he'd made to a broken child who'd somehow pieced his broken heart back together. Whatever came next, he would face it. But he would not face it alone. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed like water through clenched fists. William Hart worked day and night, interviewing former orphans, tracking documents, building something that might save Rosie. But every day brought new obstacles. Witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember. Papers that mysteriously vanished. Doors that slammed shut. Whitmore's reach ran deeper than anyone had known. "He's got the sheriff in his pocket," William reported grimly on day 9. "And 2 of the 3 town councilmen. The judge, Abraham Stone, is honest. But even honest men can be pressured." So what do? We find something he can't bury, something too big to ignore. Nate spent those days torn between fury and terror. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the hearing looming closer with every sunrise. Rosie knew something was wrong. She'd stopped asking questions, but her eyes followed Nate everywhere, watching, worried. She'd started having nightmares again, worse than before. "Papa go away?" she whispered one night, shaking him awake at 3 a.m. Nate pulled her into his arms. "I'm right here, sweetheart."
"But the bad man wants to take me."
"He won't."
"How do you know?"
"Because I'll kill him first," Nate thought. But he said, "Because I promised, and I keep my promises." Rosie pressed her face against his chest.
"I don't want to go back to the dark room."
"There is no dark room here, remember? But if they take me, nobody's taking you anywhere." Nate's arms tightened around her. "You hear me? Nobody." She fell asleep eventually, but Nate didn't. He lay awake until dawn, holding his daughter, making plans. If the law failed them, he would take Rosie and run. He had money, connections in California, contacts who owed him favors. They could disappear, start over, build a new life somewhere Whitmore's shadow couldn't reach. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. On day 11, Dr. Eleanor Grant came to the ranch. She was a rarity in Montana territory, a female physician trained in Philadelphia who'd come west after her husband died. Most of the town's men refused to see her, but the women swore by her skills. "I heard about your situation," she said, standing in Nate's parlor with her medical bag clutched in both hands. "I want to help." "How?" "I've examined children from Whitmore's orphanage before, 3 of them over the past 2 years. Her voice hardened. 2 had injuries consistent with severe beatings. 1 had marks that suggested other abuse. Nate's stomach turned. "Did you report it?" "I tried. The sheriff dismissed my concerns, said children lie, that I was misinterpreting innocent accidents." Bitterness crept into her voice. "A woman's word against a man of God's. I never stood a chance." "But if you testified at the hearing—" "I would, gladly." Eleanor met his eyes. "But I need to examine Rosie first. Document her injuries properly. Create a medical record that even Stone can't ignore." Nate hesitated. Rosie had barely gotten comfortable with Martha touching her. A stranger poking and prodding. "She's terrified of being examined." "I know. That's why I'm asking your permission first." Eleanor's expression softened. "I won't force her. Won't even try if she says no. But if she'll let me, I might be able to give you the evidence you need." Nate found Rosie in the barn with Tommy, feeding carrots to Buttercup. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you." Rosie looked up, instantly wary.
"Am I in trouble?"
No. He crouched down to her level. "There's a lady here, a doctor. She wants to look at you, make sure you're healthy." Rosie's face went white. No. She's very gentle. She won't hurt you. They always say that. Rosie backed away, shaking her head. They always say gentle, and then they're not. This is different. No! Rosie's voice rose to a scream. No doctors! No looking! No! She bolted, disappearing through the barn door before Nate could react. Tommy's eyes were huge. I'll find her. No. Let me. He found her 20 minutes later, huddled in the hayloft, biscuit pressed against her face. She was shaking so hard, Nate could hear her teeth chattering. He climbed up slowly, making noise so she'd know he was coming. Hey! No response. He sat down a few feet away, giving her space. I'm sorry I scared you. That wasn't fair. Still nothing. Can you tell me why you're so afraid of doctors? Silence stretched between them. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. They look at the bad parts. What bad parts? The parts that make you dirty. Rosie's voice was hollow. The parts that make people not want you. Nate's heart cracked clean in half. Rosie, sweetheart, there's nothing dirty about you. Nothing. The other doctor said there was. She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. At the orphanage, he looked at my back and said I was damaged goods. Said nobody would want a broken thing like me. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage flooded through Nate's veins. That doctor was wrong, he managed through clenched teeth. Dead wrong. You're not broken, Rosie. You're not damaged. You're perfect. Then why do they hurt me? The question hung in the air like something poisonous. Nate didn't have an answer. There was no answer that could make sense of grown adults beating a 3-year-old child. Because they were evil, he said finally. Because something was wrong with them, not you. You didn't do anything to deserve what happened. Nothing. Rosie studied his face with those 2 old eyes. The lady doctor, is she nice? I think so, but you don't have to see her if you don't want to. Will it help, looking at my bad parts? God, it killed him as she called them that. It might help us fight the bad man, the one who wants to take you away. Rosie considered this for a long moment. Then she stood up, brushed hay from her dress, and lifted her chin with a determination that broke Nate's heart. Okay, she can look, but you have to stay. I'll stay as long as you need me. The examination was brutal to watch. Eleanor was gentle, truly gentle, but every time she touched Rosie, the little girl flinched. Every time she asked Rosie to move or turn, Rosie's body went rigid with fear. But she didn't cry, didn't scream, just held Nate's hand in a death grip and stared at the wall. Jesus Christ, Eleanor breathed when she saw Rosie's back. How old are these? Some are months old, Nate said through gritted teeth. Some are newer. Eleanor's hands trembled as she documented each scar, each bruise, each mark that told the story of systematic abuse. There are at least 15 separate incidents here, different stages of healing. Her voice was thick. This wasn't punishment for misbehavior. This was torture. Can you prove it came from the orphanage? I can prove it didn't happen on your ranch. The oldest scars predate your custody by months. Eleanor looked at him with fire in her eyes. This child was being beaten regularly, Mr. Holloway, by someone with access to a belt or strap, someone in a position of authority. Whitmore. Or someone working for him. Eleanor closed her bag. I'll have my report ready for the hearing. And Mr. Holloway, whatever happens, I want you to know you saved this child's life. After Eleanor left, Rosie sat in Nate's lap, exhausted and trembling. Did I do good? You did so good, sweetheart. So brave. Will it help? I think so. I hope so.
Rosie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Papa?" Nate's breath caught. She'd called him that before, but never so deliberately, never with such intention. "Yeah?"
If the bad man wins, will you remember me?
His arms tightened around her. "Nobody's going to win except us."
But if they do,
Her voice was small but steady.
if they take me back, will you remember that I was happy here? That I had a papa and a horse and cookies whenever I wanted?
"Rosie."
I need to know.
She looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes. "I need to know that somewhere, someone remembers that I was happy, even if it was just for a little while." Nate couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except hold this tiny child who'd learned to prepare for happiness being stolen. "I'll remember," he whispered finally. "But it won't come to that. I swear to you." 2 days before the hearing, everything changed. A young woman arrived at the ranch, barely 18, thin as a rail, with haunted eyes that reminded Nate sickeningly of Rosie.
Mr. Holloway? She twisted her hands nervously. I'm Sarah Miller. I used to live at Reverend Whitmore's orphanage.
"Come inside." Her story spilled out in the kitchen, Martha pressing tea into her hands while she talked.
I was there for 6 years, from when I was 8 until I aged out at 14.
Sarah's voice shook, but didn't stop. The beatings were regular. If you talked back, if you didn't work fast enough, if you looked at him wrong. But that wasn't the worst part. What was the worst part? The ones who got sold. Sarah's face went pale. Pretty girls, mostly. Young ones. Families would come, look us over like livestock, pay Whitmore, and take us away. Adopted? No, something else. She met Nate's eyes. I had a friend, Mary. She was 7. A couple from Helena paid $50 for her, and she went away happy, thinking she was getting a family. What happened? I saw her 2 years later, in Helena, working in a... Sarah stopped, swallowed hard. A house. A bad house. She didn't recognize me, or pretended not to. Martha made a sound like she'd been struck. And Mrs. Price? Nate asked quietly. She took 3 girls while I was there. Said she needed household help. Sarah's hands tightened around her teacup. None of them ever came back. None of them ever wrote. They just disappeared. Would you testify to this? That's why I'm here. Sarah lifted her chin, a spark of defiance breaking through the fear. I heard what you did with the auction. How you saved that little girl. Nobody ever saved us, Mr. Holloway. Nobody ever even tried. You're brave to come forward. I'm terrified, Sarah admitted. Whitmore has friends everywhere. If he finds out I talked... Stay here, at the ranch, until the hearing's over. I couldn't... You can, and you will. Martha's voice brooked no argument. This house has plenty of room, and nobody threatens a guest under my roof. That night, Nate sat with William Hart until past midnight, piecing together everything they'd gathered. Eleanor's medical report, Sarah's testimony, financial records William had managed to obtain showing payments from Mrs. Price to Whitmore's orphanage. Payments that didn't match any official adoption records. It's not airtight, William admitted. A good lawyer could poke holes, but it's enough to raise doubt. Maybe enough to save Rosie. Maybe isn't good enough. It's what we have. Nate stared at the papers spread across his desk. What if we lose? Then we appeal, file injunctions, stall. And in the meantime, Rosie goes back to that place? William was quiet for a long moment. There might be another option. I'm listening. If you were married, the court would look at you differently. A stable family unit, a mother figure for Rosie. I'm not marrying someone just to win a custody case. I know,
but it's worth considering. William stood, gathering his papers. Get some sleep, Mr. Holloway. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But Nate didn't sleep. He sat on Rosie's floor, watching her breathe, counting the hours until everything he'd built could be taken away. The morning of the hearing dawned hot and merciless. Nate dressed in his best suit, the one he'd worn to Clara's funeral. Rosie wore a new dress Martha had made, white with blue flowers, her hair braided neat and clean. "Do I look pretty?" she asked, spinning for him. "Prettiest girl in Montana." "Pretty enough to keep?" The question gutted him. "Rosie, no matter what happens today, you are worth keeping. You understand me? This isn't about whether you're good enough. This is about grown-ups fighting over something that should never have been in question." She nodded slowly. "Okay, Papa." They rode into town in silence. Martha sat with Rosie in the wagon bed, holding her hand. Sarah followed on a borrowed horse, pale but determined. The courthouse was packed. Half the town had turned out, some curious, some supportive, most just hungry for spectacle. Nate spotted Whitmore immediately, standing near the front in his black preacher suit, Harriet Price beside him. They both looked supremely confident. That confidence wavered slightly when they saw Sarah. "What's she doing here?" Harriet hissed. Whitmore's face went carefully blank. "Nothing to worry about. The word of a former orphan against a man of God? Nobody will believe her." But his eyes said something different. His eyes said, afraid. Judge Abraham Stone called the court to order, and Nate's fate began to be decided. Whitmore's lawyer went first, a slick man from Helena named Patterson, all smooth words and practiced outrage. "This child was removed from proper care without authorization. Mr. Holloway, however well-intentioned, circumvented established procedures designed to protect vulnerable children. The orphanage system exists for a reason." "Objection." William rose. "The auction at which Mr. Holloway acquired custody has been conducted annually for 15 years without challenge from Reverend Whitmore. Because I trusted that good families would step forward." Whitmore's voice rang with practiced sincerity. "I never imagined a single man with no experience would attempt to raise a young girl alone." "Reverend Whitmore, you'll have your chance to testify." Judge Stone's voice was stern. "Continue, Mr. Patterson." Patterson laid out his case: Nate's isolation, his lack of family, the absence of a proper maternal influence. He painted a picture of a lonely bachelor playing at fatherhood with a child who deserved better. "And what does better look like?" William asked during cross-examination. "The orphanage where she was beaten? The system that was preparing to sell her to the highest bidder?" "Objection! Inflammatory!" "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Reverend." Whitmore's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes turned cold. "I have no knowledge of any mistreatment. The orphanage follows all established guidelines for child welfare." "Then how do you explain this?" William handed the judge Eleanor's medical report. Stone read it, and his face went gray. 15 documented instances of beating," William continued. "Scars consistent with whipping. Bruises in various stages of healing. All sustained before Mr. Holloway took custody." "Children fall," Patterson interjected. "They play roughly. On their backs, with marks that match a belt or strap?" William's voice cut like a blade. "These aren't playground injuries, Your Honor. This is systematic abuse." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Stone banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order!" When the room quieted, Stone turned to Whitmore. "Reverend, do you have any explanation for these injuries?" "The child came to us already damaged." Whitmore's voice dripped with false concern. "Her mother was negligent, her circumstances dire. We did our best to rehabilitate her, but some damage cannot be undone." "That's a lie." Every head turned toward the back of the courtroom. Sarah stood, trembling but resolute. "That's a lie, and he knows it." "Young woman, this is highly irregular," Patterson started. "Let her speak." Stone's eyes were sharp. "Who are you?" "Sarah Miller. I spent 6 years in Reverend Whitmore's care." Sarah walked forward, her voice growing stronger with each step. "I know what happens in that orphanage. I know about the beatings, the starvation, the children who disappear." "Disappear?" "Sold. To families who don't want children. They want workers. Servants." Sarah's gaze locked onto Harriet Price, who had gone deathly pale. "Or worse." "This is outrageous!" Whitmore surged to his feet. "This girl is clearly disturbed." "I have names." Sarah didn't flinch. "Mary Collins, sold to a Helena buyer at age 7. Last seen working in a brothel. Catherine Moore, taken by Mrs. Price at age 9. Never heard from again. Thomas Reed, 8 years old, purchased by a mining company. Died in a cave-in 6 months later." The courtroom exploded. Stone pounded his gavel until silence returned, his face like thunder. "Reverend Whitmore, Mrs. Price, you will remain in this courthouse when proceedings conclude. Sheriff, see that they don't leave." Whitmore's face had gone the color of ash. Harriet looked like she might faint. "Your Honor," Patterson attempted, "these are unsubstantiated accusations." "Then they can be investigated. In the meantime, we have a custody matter to resolve." Stone turned to Nate. "Mr. Holloway, I'd like to hear from you." Nate stood, his legs unsteady. "What would you like to know?" "Why did you take this child?" The question he'd been asked a dozen times. The question he'd never fully answered. He looked at Rosie, sitting between Martha and Eleanor, her bear clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on his face. "Because she was standing on that platform, and nobody wanted her." His voice came out rough. "Because I know what it's like to feel that way, to believe you're not worth fighting for." "You're a wealthy man, Mr. Holloway, a respected rancher. Surely you've never—" "My wife died 4 years ago. My son, 3 days later." The words tore out of him. "I spent 4 years convinced that caring about anyone was a death sentence, that it was safer to be alone." He paused, gathering himself. "Then I saw Rosie, saw her standing there with nothing but a broken toy and broken faith, waiting for someone to tell her she mattered. And I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let her believe the lie that she wasn't worth saving." "And are you equipped to raise her? A single man with no experience?" "No." The honesty surprised everyone, including Nate. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I mess up constantly. But I love her, and I will spend every day of my life trying to be what she needs." "Papa." Rosie's small voice cut through the courtroom. She'd slipped away from Martha and was standing in the aisle, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, I want to say something." Stone leaned forward. "Child, this is a courtroom." "Please," Rosie's voice broke. "Please let me talk." The judge studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Rosie walked forward, so small among all these adults, so fragile-looking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "The bad man says I need a proper family, a mama and a papa and a nice house." She looked at Whitmore, and something fierce flashed in her eyes. "But I had those things at his orphanage. I had a bed and food sometimes, and other kids. And they still hurt me." She turned to the judge. "Papa Nate never hurts me. He reads me stories. He lets me name the baby horses. He stays with me when I have bad dreams, even when he's tired." Her small hands clenched at her sides. "He chose me when nobody else would. And I choose him back." The silence that followed was absolute. "That's—" Stone cleared his throat. "That's quite a statement, young lady." "I mean it." Rosie's chin lifted. If you send me back to the bad man, I'll run away. I'll run and run until I find Papa again. Because he's my family now, and nobody gets to take that away. She walked back to Nate, wrapped her arms around his leg, and held on like she'd never let go. Stone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. In 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such courage from one so young. He looked at Whitmore, then at Harriet, then at Nate and Rosie, and rarely seen such darkness masquerading as righteousness. He picked up his gavel. It is the ruling of this court that Rosie remains in the custody of Nathaniel Holloway, effective immediately and permanently. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the operations of the Silver Creek Orphanage and the activities of Reverend Samuel Whitmore and Mrs. Harriet Price. The gavel came down like thunder. Court is adjourned. Chaos erupted. People shouted, cried, rushed forward. Whitmore tried to flee and was stopped by the sheriff. Harriet collapsed into her seat, sobbing. But Nate heard none of it. He dropped to his knees and gathered Rosie into his arms, holding her so tight he could feel her heartbeat against his own. "We won," she whispered. "We really won?" "We really won, sweetheart." "I get to stay?" "Forever." She pulled back, her face wet with tears but split by a smile so bright it could have lit up the whole courthouse. "I told you," she said. "I told you we were brave." Nate laughed, a real laugh, the first one in years, and pressed his forehead against hers. "Yeah, little one, we really are." Around them, the world continued its chaos. Justice being served, villains being led away, a community reckoning with horrors it had ignored for too long. But in that moment, none of it mattered. A father had fought for his daughter. A daughter had found her voice. And a family, forged not from blood but from choice, had won the right to exist. The days after the hearing felt like waking from a long nightmare. Whitmore was arrested before he could leave the courthouse. Harriet Price followed within the hour. The sheriff, facing his own investigation, suddenly became very cooperative, producing records he'd claimed didn't exist. 7 children were recovered from Mrs. Price's household, all of them malnourished, all of them bearing scars similar to Rosie's. The youngest was 4. The oldest was 12 and couldn't remember ever being called by her real name. Silver Creek would never be the same, but Nate barely noticed the town's reckoning. His entire world had narrowed to the small girl who now ran through his house without flinching, who laughed at Tommy's jokes, who fell asleep without checking the door 3 times first. "Papa, watch!" Rosie stood on the corral fence, arms spread wide for balance. 2 months ago, she would have been too terrified to climb anything. Now she was fearless. "Careful, sweetheart." "I am careful." She wobbled, caught herself, grinned. "See? I didn't fall." "Not yet." "Not ever." She jumped down into his arms with complete confidence that he would catch her, because he always did. "Buttercup's getting big," she said, as Nate carried her toward the barn. "Tommy says she'll be ready to ride soon." "Tommy talks too much." "Tommy's my best friend." Rosie wrapped her arms around Nate's neck. "After you and Martha and Biscuit." "I'm honored to be in such distinguished company." She giggled. The sound still made Nate's chest ache with gratitude. "Papa?" "Yeah?" "Do you think Mama can see me? From heaven?" The question caught him off guard. Rosie rarely talked about her mother, Annie, he'd learned. A laundress who'd worked herself to death trying to keep her daughter fed. "I think she can," Nate said carefully. "I think she's real proud of you. Even though I live with you now? Even though I call you Papa? Especially because of that." Nate set her down, crouched to her level. "Your mama wanted you to be happy, Rosie. Safe. Loved. That's all any good parent wants. Rosie considered this. Do you think she sent you? To the auction? What do you mean? Martha says sometimes angels send people to help us when we can't help ourselves. Rosie's brown eyes were serious. Maybe Mama sent you to be my new papa, because she couldn't be here anymore. Nate's throat closed up. He'd spent 4 years thinking Clara's death meant God had abandoned him. That faith was foolishness. That hoping for anything good was a recipe for heartbreak. But looking at Rosie now, healthy and happy and trusting him with everything she had, he wondered if maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe she did, he said quietly. Maybe she did. The 4th of July celebration came 2 weeks after the hearing. Silver Creek had always made a big occasion of Independence Day. Picnics and games and fireworks after dark. This year, the celebration carried extra weight. The town was trying to heal, to prove it wasn't defined by the monsters who'd lived among them. Nate hadn't planned to attend. He'd spent years avoiding these gatherings, preferring isolation to forced sociability. But Rosie had other ideas.
Please, Papa? Tommy says there's pie and games and fireworks that look like flowers in the sky.
You've never seen fireworks? She shook her head, eyes wide with anticipation. And that was that. The town square was transformed when they arrived. Tables laden with food, children running everywhere, a makeshift stage where a fiddler played enthusiastic, if slightly off-key, tunes. Rosie gripped Nate's hand tightly, overwhelmed by the crowds and noise. But she didn't hide, didn't run, just pressed closer to his leg and took it all in. Mr. Holloway, Margaret Turner, Jake's wife, bustled over with a plate of cookies. And this must be Rosie. I've heard so much about you, sweetheart. Rosie looked up at Nate, seeking guidance. It's okay, he said. Mrs. Turner is a friend. You can call me Margaret, honey. She crouched down, offering the cookies. Would you like one? I made them this morning. Rosie hesitated, then took a cookie. Thank you, ma'am. Such good manners, Margaret beamed. Nate, she's absolutely precious. Don't I know it? More people approached as the afternoon wore on. Some curious, some apologetic for having doubted Nate's intentions, some simply wanting to meet the little girl who'd helped expose Whitmore's crimes. Rosie handled it all with remarkable grace. She answered questions politely, accepted compliments shyly, and only retreated behind Nate's legs when the attention became too much. She's something special, Jake observed, appearing beside Nate with 2 glasses of lemonade. Watching her now, you'd never guess what she's been through. The scars are still there. She just hides them better. Don't we all? Jake handed him a glass. You done good, Nate. Clara would be proud. The mention of his wife no longer felt like a knife to the chest, more like a gentle ache, a reminder of love that had existed and mattered. I like to think so. Papa! Rosie came running up, Tommy close behind. Tommy says there's a potato sack race. Can I try? Can I? You ever done a potato sack race before? No, but Tommy says it's easy. You just hop. Hopping's harder than it looks. Please? He couldn't say no to that face. Had never been able to. Probably never would be. Go on then, but be careful. She ran off shrieking with excitement, Tommy coaching her on technique as they went. That boy's been good for her, Jake observed. They've been good for each other. The sack race was a disaster in the best possible way. Rosie fell over approximately 17 times, laughed until she couldn't breathe, and finished dead last. She didn't care in the slightest. Did you see me, Papa? Did you see? I saw. Nate caught her as she launched herself at him. You were magnificent. I fell a lot. Falling's part of learning. Getting back up is what matters. She beamed at him, sweaty and grass-stained, and incandescently happy. Then someone screamed. Nate's head whipped around. Near the edge of the celebration, a crowd was forming, people pushing and shouting. "Stay with Martha," he told Rosie, setting her down. "Don't move." He pushed through the crowd and found Eleanor Grant kneeling over a young woman, one of the children rescued from Mrs. Price's house. The girl was convulsing, foam at her mouth, eyes rolled back.
What happened?
"I don't know." Eleanor's hands were steady despite the chaos. "She was fine, then she just collapsed. Someone get my bag. It's in my buggy." Nate ran, retrieved the bag, ran back. Eleanor worked quickly, administering something from a small vial, holding the girl's head steady. The convulsions slowed, stopped. The girl's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. "You're safe," Eleanor said firmly. "You're at the celebration. Do you remember?"
I saw him."
Saw who?
The Reverend.
The girl's voice dropped to a terrified whisper.
He was watching me. From the crowd.
Nate's blood went cold. "That's impossible. He's in jail."
I saw him.
Tears streamed down the girl's face.
I saw him. I saw him."
Eleanor met Nate's eyes, her expression grim. Trauma response. She's reliving past fear, projecting it onto the present. But she's certain. Certainty doesn't equal reality. Not with what these children experienced. They got the girl calmed down, turned her over to the women who'd been caring for the rescued children. But unease lingered in Nate's gut as he returned to Rosie.
What happened? Martha asked quietly.
One of Price's girls had an episode. Thought she saw Whitmore.
Dear God, Martha crossed herself. Those poor children. It'll take years for them to heal. If they ever do.
Nate looked at Rosie, who was watching him with worried eyes. "Some of them will," he said. "With enough love, enough time." The fireworks began at dusk. Rosie sat in Nate's lap, biscuit clutched tight, watching the sky explode in colors she'd never imagined.
"Papa, look! That one's blue!"
"I see it."
"And that one's red, like apples!"
"Mm-hmm."
"And—"
She jumped as a particularly loud one exploded.
"That one's loud!"
"Scared?"
"A little."
She pressed closer.
"But the good kind of scared. Like when Buttercup runs fast."
"The good kind of scared," Nate repeated. "I like that."
Martha says feeling scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're doing something that matters.
Martha's a wise woman. Rosie was quiet for a moment, watching the colors paint the darkness.
"Papa?"
"Yeah?"
"I love you."
3 words. Simple words. Words children said to parents all the time. But Rosie had never said them before. Had never trusted anyone enough. Believed anyone enough. Felt safe enough. Nate's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in the world."
"Forever?"
"Forever and a day." She relaxed against him, content, and they watched the rest of the fireworks in silence. A father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. The summer stretched on, hot and golden. Rosie turned 4 in late July. Nate threw her a party. Nothing elaborate, just the ranch hands and their families, Tommy and his parents, Eleanor and William, and a few others who'd become friends.
She'd never had a birthday party before.
Hadn't known such things existed for children like her.
"All these presents are for me?"
She stared at the small pile on the kitchen table, overwhelmed. Every single one.
"But why?"
"Because it's your birthday. Because you matter. Because people who love you want to celebrate you." She opened each gift slowly, reverently, as if they might disappear if she moved too fast. A new dress from Martha. Hair ribbons from Tommy. A book of fairy tales from Eleanor. A carved wooden horse from Jake. And from Nate, a locket that had belonged to Clara. "This was my wife's," he said, fastening it around Rosie's neck. "She would have loved you, Rosie. Would have been so proud to be your mama." Rosie touched the locket with wondering fingers. "It's beautiful." "Open it." Inside were two tiny paintings, Clara on one side, Rosie on the other. "So you can keep us both close to your heart," Nate said. "Your first mama, who watches over you from heaven, and your family here, who'll love you forever." Rosie burst into tears. Happy tears, she assured him, the best kind of tears. The cake Martha had baked was chocolate, 3 layers high, with 4 candles that Rosie blew out in one mighty breath. "What did you wish for?" Tommy asked. "Can't tell. It won't come true." "That's just superstition." "Is not, Martha said." "Martha says lots of things." "Children." Martha's voice cut through the argument. "There's cake to eat and games to play. Save the bickering for later." That night, after the party had ended and the guests had gone home, Rosie found Nate on the porch. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Don't want to." She climbed into his lap. "Want to remember today forever. All of it." "Why's that?" "Because it's the best day of my whole life." She leaned her head against his chest. "Because I have a papa who loves me, and friends who came to my party, and a locket with 2 mamas in it." "You deserve all that and more, sweetheart." "I know." She said it matter-of-factly, without doubt. "You taught me that." Nate held her close, watching the stars emerge one by one. A year ago, he'd been a ghost, empty, convinced that love was just another word for eventual loss. Now he had a daughter, a family, a life worth living. All because a 3-year-old girl with nothing but a broken toy and broken faith had taught him that some things were worth the risk. In early August, Dr. Grant brought news. "The investigation into Whitmore is expanding," she told Nate over coffee in his kitchen. "They found records going back 15 years. Hundreds of children sold, dozens unaccounted for." "And the ones they can find?" "Being returned to family when possible, placed with proper adoptive families when not." Eleanor's expression was grim. "But many of them, Nate, what these children endured. The scars won't heal overnight." "I know. Some of them may never heal at all. We're seeing behaviors, self-harm, aggression, withdrawal. The damage runs deep." Nate thought about Rosie, who still sometimes flinched at loud noises, who still checked the door was locked before bed, who still, occasionally, had nightmares about dark rooms and belts. "But they can get better," he said. "With time. With love." "Some of them," Eleanor met his eyes. "The ones who find what Rosie found. The ones who get chosen by someone willing to fight for them." "There should be more people willing to fight." "There should be." She paused. "That's actually why I'm here. Beyond the investigation news." "Oh?" "There's a boy. Samuel. He's 7. Been in the system since he was 3. No one wants him because he's—" She searched for the word. "Difficult. Angry. He's been returned twice by families who couldn't handle him. And you telling me this because—" "Because I've seen what you've done with Rosie. How you've reached her, healed her. And I thought—" Eleanor hesitated. "I thought maybe you might consider—" "Taking on another child?" "It's a lot to ask, I know that. But Samuel reminds me of Rosie in a way. The same walls. The same certainty that no one will ever want him." Nate was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the empty rooms in his house, the abundance he'd accumulated without anyone to share it, the years he'd spent thinking he wasn't capable of love. "I'd have to talk to Rosie first." Eleanor's face lit up. "You're considering it?" "I'm not saying no." He found Rosie in the barn, brushing Buttercup with the careful attention she gave everything she loved. Can I ask you something, sweetheart?
Sure, Papa.
He sat down on a hay bale, and she immediately climbed into his lap, bringing the smell of horse and hay with her. How would you feel about having a brother? Rosie went very still. A brother? There's a boy, Samuel. He's 7. He doesn't have a family, and he's had a really hard time. Kind of like you did. Is he sad? I think so. And angry. And scared. Rosie considered this seriously. Did people hurt him too? Yes. Does he have nightmares? Probably. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I was really scared when you brought me home. Everything was new and strange, and I kept waiting for you to be mean like everyone else. I remember. But you weren't mean. You were patient. You let me be scared until I wasn't anymore. She looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. Maybe Samuel needs someone to be patient with him too. Maybe he does. And maybe, she bit her lip, maybe he could be my brother. And I could show him how the nightmares get smaller when you have people who love you. Nate's heart swelled. You'd be okay with that? Sharing me? You have lots of love, Papa. Rosie said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Enough for lots of people. Martha says love doesn't run out. It just grows bigger. Martha's right. Martha's always right, Rosie grinned. So can we? Can Samuel come live with us? Let's meet him first. Make sure we're all a good fit. Okay. She wrapped her arms around his neck. But I think it'll work out. I think maybe God sent Samuel to us, like he sent you to me. You think so? I know so. Her voice was fierce with certainty. Because that's what families do, Papa. They find each other, even when nobody thinks they should. The meeting with Samuel was scheduled for the following week. Nate spent the days before wrestling with doubt. Was he ready for another child? Could he handle a boy with anger issues, with trauma deeper and more complex than Rosie's? Was he being foolish, reaching for more than he could hold? But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Rosie's words. Love doesn't run out, it just grows bigger. And he remembered himself, 4 years ago, building walls and convincing himself that isolation was safety. How wrong he'd been. How empty that life had felt. Some things were worth the risk. The day before they were supposed to meet Samuel, Rosie came to Nate with a gift. I made this, she said, holding out a small object wrapped in cloth. For Samuel, for when he comes. Nate unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden horse, crudely carved but recognizable, painted with what looked like berry juice. I asked Jake to help me, Rosie explained. It's not very good, but when I came here, biscuit was all I had. And Samuel doesn't have anything, so I thought maybe he could have a horse, like Buttercup. Something that's just his. Nate couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything but pull his daughter into his arms and hold her tight. It's perfect, he managed finally. He's going to love it. You think so? I know so. Rosie beamed. I want him to feel like he belongs, like someone wanted to give him something special. You're going to be the best big sister, you know that? I know, she giggled. That's why I practiced on Tommy first. The morning they were supposed to leave for Helena dawned bright and hot. Nate was loading the wagon when a rider came thundering down the road. William Hart, his face pale with urgency. Nate, there's been an incident. What kind of incident? Whitmore. William dismounted, breathing hard. He escaped custody last night. They think he had help from inside the jail. The world tilted. Where is he now? Nobody knows, but Nate, William met his eyes. There's talk he's coming for revenge. against the people who exposed him, against the children who testified, against Rosie. Nate's blood turned to ice. "Martha!" he shouted, already striding toward the house. "Get Rosie! Get her now! We're leaving!" "Leaving? But Samuel—" "Samuel can wait." Nate grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. "Whitmore's loose, and he's coming for us." Martha's face went white. She ran for the stairs. "Jake!" Nate stepped onto the porch. "Jake, I need every man you can spare, armed and ready." Jake was already running toward the bunkhouse. "On it, boss!" Rosie appeared in the doorway, clutching Biscuit, her face confused and frightened.
"Papa, what's wrong? Why is everyone yelling?"
Nate crouched down, took her shoulders gently. "Listen to me, sweetheart. The bad man, Whitmore, he got away from the people who were supposed to keep him locked up." Her face went gray. "He's coming here? He might be, which is why we're going to stay somewhere safe until they catch him again. But the ranch? The ranch will be fine. Right now, all that matters is keeping you safe." Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry, didn't panic, just lifted her chin and said, "Okay, Papa. I'll be brave." God, this child. This incredible, resilient child. "I know you will, sweetheart. I know you will." They loaded into the wagon within the hour. Nate, Rosie, Martha, and 4 armed ranch hands. The plan was to ride to Helena, stay with William's family until Whitmore was recaptured. But they'd barely cleared the ranch gates when a shot rang out. One of the horses screamed and went down. The wagon lurched, tilted. "Get down!" Nate shouted, grabbing Rosie and throwing himself over her as more shots cracked through the air. Chaos. Men yelling, horses panicking, and somewhere in the midst of it all, a voice Nate recognized. "You thought you could destroy me?" Whitmore's voice was ragged, half mad. "You thought you could take everything I built and walk away?" Nate lifted his head, keeping Rosie pressed beneath him. Whitmore stood 30 yards away, flanked by 2 men with rifles. His clothes were dirty, his eyes wild. He looked nothing like the polished preacher who'd stood in the courthouse. "Let the women and children go," Nate called out. "This is between you and me." "No, this is between me and everyone who betrayed me." Whitmore's gun swung toward the wagon. "Starting with that little demon you've been harboring." Rosie. He was pointing at Rosie. Something primal erupted in Nate's chest. He rose, putting himself between Whitmore and his daughter. "You'll have to go through me." "Gladly." The gun came up, and Nate moved. Later, he wouldn't remember the details. The bullet that grazed his shoulder. The tackle that brought Whitmore down. The struggle in the dirt. 2 men fighting for the right to decide a child's future. What he would remember was Rosie's voice, cutting through the chaos. "Papa!" And the sound of a shot. And then silence. When Nate opened his eyes, Whitmore was on the ground, unmoving. Jake stood over him, rifle smoking. "Boss? You all right?" Nate couldn't answer, could only push himself up, turn around, search frantically for... "Papa!" Rosie slammed into him, nearly knocking him over, her arms wrapped so tight around his neck he could barely breathe. "You're bleeding," she sobbed. "Papa, you're bleeding!" "It's just a scratch." He held her, felt her heartbeat racing against his own. "I'm okay. We're okay." "I thought he was going to take me. I thought he was going to hurt you and take me back." "Never." Nate's voice broke. "Never, sweetheart. I will never let anyone take you from me. Do you understand? Never." She nodded against his neck, still crying, still clinging. And Nate held her there, in the dirt, surrounded by chaos and aftermath, and made a vow to whatever power had brought them together. This child would never be afraid again. Not as long as he had breath in his body. Not as long as there was fight left in his heart. She was his daughter, his family, his reason for everything. And no one, not Whitmore, not the law, not God himself, would ever take that away. The wound on Nate's shoulder healed faster than the wound in Rosie's trust. For 3 weeks after the attack, she wouldn't let him out of her sight. She slept in his bed, clutching Biscuit with one hand and Nate's shirt with the other. She followed him everywhere, the barn, the fields, the outhouse. If he disappeared for even a moment, she panicked. "I'm just getting water," Nate said gently one morning, prying her fingers from his sleeve. "I'll be right back." "No," her voice was sharp with terror. "Don't go." "Rosie, sweetheart." "He came back." Her eyes were wild. "The bad man came back. You said he couldn't, but he did. What if there are more bad men? What if they come when you're getting water?" Nate crouched down, took her small face in his hands. "There are no more bad men. Whitmore is gone. Really gone this time." "You promise?" "I promise." "You promised before." The words hit him like a slap. She was right. He had promised, and that promise had nearly gotten them both killed. "I know." He kept his voice steady. "And I'm sorry. I was wrong to promise something I couldn't control. But I can promise you this. I will always fight for you. I will always protect you. And I will never, ever stop loving you. Even when I'm scared and clingy and annoying? Especially then." He kissed her forehead, "Because that's when you need me most." Slowly, painfully, Rosie began to heal again. Martha helped. Tommy helped. The rhythm of ranch life helped. Predictable, steady, full of small tasks that kept hands busy and minds occupied. But the biggest help came from an unexpected source. Samuel arrived in September. Eleanor had postponed the meeting after Whitmore's attack, waiting until Rosie was stable enough to handle another change. But Rosie surprised everyone. "I want to meet him," she announced one morning, nearly a month after the attack. "I want to meet my brother." "Are you sure?" Mate asked carefully. "There's no rush." "I'm sure." Her chin lifted with familiar determination. "Samuel's been waiting long enough. It's not fair to make him wait more because I'm scared." "Your feelings matter too, sweetheart." "I know." She took his hand. "But so do his. And I think maybe helping him will help me too. Martha says sometimes the best way to feel better is to make someone else feel better." "Martha's a wise woman. That's what I keep telling you." Samuel was nothing like Nate expected. He'd braced himself for anger, for defiance, for walls higher than the ones Rosie had built. Instead, he found a boy who was completely, utterly shut down. Samuel sat in Eleanor's office like a statue, still, silent, his eyes fixed on a spot somewhere past Nate's shoulder. He was small for 7, thin in a way that spoke of chronic hunger, with dark hair that needed cutting, and clothes that were clean but worn. "Samuel," Eleanor's voice was gentle. "This is Mr. Holloway, and this is Rosie. We talked about them, remember?" No response. "Samuel?" Nothing. Not a flicker of acknowledgement. Rosie tugged on Mate's sleeve. He bent down. "Can I try?" she whispered. Nate hesitated. This wasn't a horse to be gentled or a kitten to be coaxed. This was a deeply traumatized child. But Rosie's eyes were earnest, certain. "Please, Papa?" He nodded. Rosie walked forward slowly, stopping a few feet from Samuel's chair. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and pulled Biscuit from her pocket. "This is Biscuit," she said conversationally. "He's my best friend. My mama gave him to me before she died." Samuel's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the bear.
He's pretty old now, and kind of ugly, but I love him anyway.
Rosie turned Biscuit over in her hands.
When I first came to live with Papa, I was really scared.
I didn't talk much. I thought if I was quiet enough, people might forget to hurt me. Something shifted in Samuel's expression. Microscopic, but there. Papa never forgot about me, though. He was always there, even when I didn't want him to be. Rosie glanced back at Nate, then returned her attention to Samuel. It took me a while to believe he wasn't going to hurt me. Sometimes I still get scared, but it gets easier. Silence. Then, so quiet it was almost inaudible. How? One word, Samuel's first word in their presence. Rosie smiled. Because every day he didn't hurt me was proof. And the proof kept piling up, until the scared got smaller and the safe got bigger. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted, not to Rosie, but to Nate. You really never hurt her? The question was flat, suspicious. The voice of a child who'd learned that adults lied. Never, Nate said. Not once. Why not? Because she's my daughter, and you don't hurt people you love. People always say that, Samuel's voice hardened. And then they hurt you anyway. Some people do. I don't. How do I know? You don't. Not yet. Nate crouched down, meeting Samuel's eyes directly. But I'm willing to prove it to you. Day after day, for as long as it takes. If you'll give me the chance. Samuel studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw must have been enough, because he finally nodded once. Okay, he whispered. I'll try. The first months with Samuel were hard. He didn't trust anyone, didn't believe kindness could exist without ulterior motive, flinched at sudden movements, hoarded food under his mattress, slept with his boots on in case he needed to run. But Nate didn't give up. Neither did Rosie. He ate breakfast at the table today, she reported proudly in October. The whole thing, without hiding anything in his pockets. That's progress. And he talked to Buttercup. I saw him. He was telling her she was pretty. He talks to horses but not people? Horses don't lie, Rosie shrugged. He told me that. He said animals are honest. People aren't. Did you tell him some people are? I told him you are. He didn't believe me. But he will, she grinned. Eventually. The breakthrough came in November. The first real cold snap hit the territory, and Nate found Samuel shivering in the barn at 3 a.m, barefoot in his nightshirt. Samuel? Nate kept his voice soft. What are you doing out here? The boy pressed himself against the wall, eyes wide with something that looked like terror. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I'll be good. Didn't mean to what? I wet the bed. Samuel's voice cracked with shame. I tried not to. I really tried. But I had a nightmare, and when I woke up... Hey. Nate stepped closer, slowly. It's okay. It's not okay. They punish you when you wet the bed. I know the rules. What rules? No food for a day, or the dark closet, or... Samuel choked on the words. Or the belt. Nate's heart shattered. He crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. Samuel, listen to me. There is no punishment for wetting the bed. Not here. Not ever. But I ruined... Sheets wash. Bodies clean up. There's nothing you could do that would make me hurt you. You're lying. I'm not. Everyone lies. I don't. Nate stayed crouched, stayed calm. I know you don't believe me. I know you've got no reason to. But I'm telling you the truth, and one day, you're gonna believe it. Samuel stared at him, shaking with cold and fear. Why? He whispered finally. Why would you want me? I'm bad. I ruin things. Everyone says so. Everyone is wrong. Nate held out his hand. You're not bad, Samuel. You're hurt. There's a difference.
What if I can't get better?
Then we'll figure it out together. But I'm not giving up on you. Not today.
Not ever.
Samuel looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Nate led him back to the house, where Martha was already heating water for a bath, and Rosie was stripping the soiled sheets without being asked.
I'll make hot chocolate, Rosie announced. That's what Papa makes me when I have nightmares.
With extra sugar, Samuel's voice was timey.
With extra everything.
That night, Samuel slept in Nate's bed, on the opposite side from Rosie, who'd refused to leave. The three of them fit awkwardly, legs tangled, elbows jabbing. It was the best night's sleep Nate had gotten in months. Winter settled over the ranch like a blanket. Samuel began to thaw along with the frozen ground. He started talking more, first to Rosie, then to Tommy, then finally to Martha and Nate. He discovered he loved horses almost as much as Rosie did.
He turned out to have a talent for wood carving that left even Jake impressed. He made this. Rosie showed Nate a small carved bird, delicate and detailed.
For me, because I told him I liked the blue jays.
That's beautiful.
He's really good at making things.
Rosie paused.
I think because he's had a lot of practice at building walls. But now he's learning to build other stuff instead.
When did you get so wise?
I've always been wise. You're just finally noticing.
Christmas came with all its attendant chaos. Nate had never celebrated the holiday properly, not since Clara died. But this year Martha insisted, and Rosie and Samuel were beside themselves with excitement.
We've never had a real Christmas,
Samuel confided to Nate on Christmas Eve. At the orphanage, they just gave us extra porridge. Well, this is going to be better than extra porridge.
Promise?
The word still cost Samuel something to say. Still felt like a risk. Promise. Christmas morning was everything Nate had hoped. The children woke at dawn, barely able to contain themselves. They tore into presents with delighted shrieks. New clothes, books, toys. Rosie got a saddle sized just for her. Samuel got a complete set of carving tools. But the best gift came last. I have something else, Nate said when the wrapping paper settled. For both of you. He handed each of them an envelope. Rosie opened hers first, read it again, looked up with tears streaming down her face.
Papa?
Official adoption papers. Nate's voice was thick. Signed by Judge Stone himself. You're not just Rosie Holloway because we say so anymore. You're Rosie Holloway, legally. Forever. She launched herself at him, sobbing. Samuel opened his envelope more slowly. His hands were shaking. This says... He stopped, swallowed. This says you're adopting me. If you want me to. But I've only been here a few months. Doesn't matter how long. Matters how much. Nate held out his arm, making room. You're my son, Samuel. Have been since the moment you took my hand in that barn. This just makes it official. Samuel stared at him. For a terrifying second, Nate thought he'd miscalculated. Then Samuel threw himself forward, crashing into Nate's chest. Thank you, he sobbed. Thank you, thank you. Nate held both children, his children, legally and forever, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete. Spring arrived with its usual drama. The ranch came alive with new foals, new calves, new beginnings. Rosie turned 5 in late March, celebrating with a party even bigger than the year before. Samuel turned 8 a month later, and Nate threw him the first birthday party he'd ever had. I don't know what to wish for, Samuel admitted, staring at his cake. I already have everything. Wish for more everything, Rosie suggested practically. That's greedy. That's smart. There's a difference. In May, William Hart brought news that made Nate's heart swell. "The orphanage reform bill passed," William announced, barely through the front door. "The one we lobbied for. Governor signed it yesterday." "What's that mean?" Rosie asked. "It means no more children will be sold. No more secret deals. No more Whitmores." William's face was bright with triumph. "It means you helped change things, Rosie. Your testimony, your courage, it mattered."
I helped? More than you know.
Rosie considered this solemnly. Then she said,
Good, because nobody should have to feel like I felt. Nobody.
Summer came, golden and full of promise. Nate sat on the porch one evening, watching his children chase fireflies across the yard. Rosie at 5, fearless and laughing. Samuel at 8, still cautious, but learning to trust. Both of them whole in ways they'd never been before. "You did good." Martha settled into the chair beside him.
Better than good. We did good. All of us. You're the one who started it. The one who stepped forward when everyone else turned away.
Nate shook his head. "I didn't start anything. I just responded to something I couldn't ignore. That's what heroes do." "I'm not a hero."
You are to them.
Martha nodded toward the children.
You're everything, Nate. Don't forget that.
As if hearing their names, both children came running over.
Papa!
Rosie scrambled onto his lap.
Samuel caught a firefly. A real one!
Samuel opened his cupped hands, revealing the tiny glow within.
I'm going to let it go. I just wanted to show you first. It's beautiful. Rosie says they're like little pieces of magic.
Samuel paused, suddenly shy.
Do you think that's true? I think magic is wherever we decide to see it.
Nate ruffled his hair. And this ranch has more magic than most places.
Because of us?
Because of all of us, together.
Samuel released the firefly, and they watched it drift up into the darkening sky. Papa?
Rosie's voice was drowsy, her head heavy against his chest. Yes, sweetheart?
Remember when you found me? At the auction?
I remember.
I thought nobody wanted me. I thought I'd never have a family.
I know.
But I was wrong,
she yawned.
I just had to wait for the right one to find me.
We found each other, Nate corrected gently. That's how it works.
Like you and Samuel.
Like me and Samuel. Samuel had settled on the porch steps, watching the fireflies dance. He turned at the sound of his name. I'm glad you found me, he said quietly. Even though I was mean at first, even though I didn't believe you.
I'm glad too.
Do you think... Samuel hesitated. Do you think there are other kids out there, like us, waiting for someone to find them? I think there are more than any of us want to believe. Maybe we could help them, someday, when we're bigger. Nate felt something warm bloom in his chest. Pride. Hope. The sense of something larger than himself taking shape. Maybe we could, he said. Maybe that's exactly what we'll do. The years that followed were full of exactly that. Rosie grew into a fierce young woman who fought for children the way Nate had fought for her. At 18, she enrolled in the first women's law program in the territory, determined to become the kind of advocate that William Hart had been.
I want to be the person who saves them, she told Nate before she left. The way you saved me.
You already are, sweetheart. You always have been. Samuel found his calling too, not in law, but in building. He became an architect, designing homes and schools and, eventually, orphanages that were nothing like the places he'd escaped. Every child deserves a beautiful space, he told reporters at the opening of his first children's home. A place that tells them they're worth something, that someone cared enough to build something good for them. And Nate watched his children change the world, one life at a time. On Rosie's wedding day, 20 years after that summer auction, Nate walked her down the aisle of the same church where Whitmore had once preached his false gospel. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. But the good kind. Like riding Buttercup fast. Like standing up in court for the first time. Like trusting someone with your heart? Yeah, she squeezed his arm. Exactly like that. You taught me that, you know. How to trust again. How to love without being afraid of losing. You taught me first. She looked up at him with those brown eyes that had captivated him from the moment he'd seen them. No longer haunted, but bright with joy. You taught me I was worth fighting for. You were always worth it, Rosie. From the very first moment. I know, she smiled. I finally believe it. The ceremony was beautiful. Samuel gave the toast. Martha cried. And when Rosie danced with her new husband, Nate felt Clara's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. You did good, he imagined her saying. Better than good. I had help, he thought back. The best kind. That night, after the guests had gone and the music had faded, Nate found himself on the porch of the ranch house. The same porch where he'd held a terrified 3-year-old and promised her safety. The same porch where he'd watched Samuel learn to trust. The same porch where his family had grown from one broken man into something beautiful beyond imagining. Thinking about the old days, Samuel settled into the chair beside him, a man now, strong and sure. Thinking about how far we've come. Long way from that auction platform. Longest journey of my life, Nate paused. And the best. Do you ever regret it, taking on all of us? Not for a single second. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to have a child soon. Sarah's pregnant. We just found out. Joy exploded in Nate's chest. Samuel, that's wonderful! I'm terrified, his son admitted. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not good enough? You'll mess up sometimes. Everyone does. But you'll also love them with everything you have. And that's what matters. How do you know I will? Because I know you. Nate reached over, gripped Samuel's shoulder. Because I've watched you grow from a boy who trusted no one into a man who loves with his whole heart. You're going to be an incredible father, Samuel. I have no doubt. Because you taught me how. Because you chose to learn. There's a difference. Rosie appeared in the doorway, still in her wedding dress. There you two are. I should have known. She crossed the porch, settled onto the arm of Nate's chair. Hiding from the party. The party's over, Samuel pointed out. Then hiding from the cleanup. That too, Rosie laughed, leaning her head against Nate's shoulder. Samuel told you his news? He did. I'm going to be an aunt. She sounded dazed, happy. A real aunt, with a real niece or nephew. We're going to be grandpa and aunt, Samuel corrected. A real family. We've always been a real family, Nate said quietly. From the moment I stepped onto that platform. Everything else has just been confirmation. They sat together as the stars emerged. 3 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate lives and built something lasting, something true. Papa? Rosie's voice was soft. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when nobody else would. For fighting when you could have walked away. For being the father I never knew I needed. Thank you for letting me. Nate kissed the top of her head. For taking the chance on a broken man who didn't know the first thing about raising children. You learned fast. I had good teachers. Samuel stood, stretched, offered a hand to help Rosie up. We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. Long life tomorrow, Rosie corrected. And the day after. And the day after that. Good, Samuel grinned. I'm planning to need every single one of them. They went inside, leaving Nate alone on the porch. He stayed there for a long time, watching the stars, thinking about all the roads that had led to this moment. The grief, the isolation, the decision that had seemed crazy at the time, but had turned out to be the sanest thing he'd ever done. Clara would have loved them, he thought, would have loved all of this. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The horses shifted in the barn. The wind carried the scent of summer grass and distant rain. And Nathaniel Holloway, who had once believed himself incapable of love, smiled. He had a daughter who fought for justice, a son who built beautiful things, a grandchild on the way. A legacy of love that would outlast him by generations. Not bad for a man who'd gone to town for a horse and come home with a family. Not bad at all. 25 years after that summer day at the auction, Nate passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his children, his grandchildren, and enough love to fill every empty room in the house that had once echoed with loneliness. His last words were to Rosie, who held his hand as the sun rose over the mountains he'd loved his whole life. "You were worth it," he whispered. "Every fight, every fear, every moment. You were worth all of it." "I know, Papa." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "You taught me that." "Then I did my job right." He closed his eyes, and Rosie, the little girl nobody wanted, the child who'd been thrown away and forgotten, held her father's hand and said goodbye to the man who had looked at her on that platform and decided she was worth everything. At his funeral, the entire territory came to pay respects. Former orphans he'd helped rescue, families he'd supported, children whose lives had been changed by the ripple effects of his single act of courage. Rosie spoke last. "My father was not a complicated man," she said, looking out of the crowd. "He believed in hard work, in keeping your word, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But the thing that made him extraordinary wasn't any of that." She paused, gathering herself. "The thing that made him extraordinary was his capacity to love, to see a broken child and believe she could be whole, to take a chance on hearts that had been shattered and trust that they could heal." She looked at Samuel, standing with his wife and their 3 children. At Martha, gray-haired now, but still fierce. At Tommy, who'd become her husband, completing a circle that had begun in a hayloft decades ago. "He taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up day after day and proving through action what words can never fully express." Her voice steadied. "My father saved my life when I was 3 years old. But more than that, he gave me a life worth living. He gave me love worth believing in. He gave me a future I never dreamed was possible." She lifted her chin, that familiar gesture of determination that Nate had recognized the very first time he'd seen it. "And I will spend the rest of my days making sure that legacy continues. That every child who feels unwanted knows there's someone fighting for them. That every broken heart learns it can beat again." She placed her hand on his casket. "That's what you taught me, Papa. That's what I'll teach them." The service ended. The crowds dispersed. But the family remained. Rosie, Samuel, Tommy, Martha. The children running between gravestones. Too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel love. They stood together at Nate's grave, watching the sun set over the mountains. "He would have hated all this fuss," Samuel said finally. "He would have loved every second of it," Rosie corrected. "He just would have pretended to hate it." "Same thing," she laughed through her tears. "Yeah, same thing." A breeze stirred the grass. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. And in that moment, Rosie felt her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you." She closed her eyes. "I know, Papa. I finally know." The Holloway Ranch stands to this day. Rosie's great-grandchildren run through its fields, play in its barns, ride horses descended from Buttercup. And in the main house, above the fireplace, hangs a portrait. A man, a woman, 2 children. Not posed stiffly like most family portraits of the era, but candid, natural. The man is laughing at something the girl has said. The boy is leaning against his shoulder. The woman, Martha, who refused to be left out, is rolling her eyes at all of them with fond exasperation. Below the portrait, on the small brass plaque, are the words Rosie chose. Family is not born, family is built, and love, once given, never dies. That is the legacy of Nathaniel Holloway. Not the ranch, not the horses, not the reforms he helped pass or the children he helped save, but the simple truth he discovered on a summer day, standing on an auction platform, looking at a child nobody wanted. That some things are worth fighting for. That some people are worth believing in. That love, in all its terrifying glory, is the only thing that makes any of it worthwhile. He found a daughter when he went looking for a horse. He found a son when he thought his heart was full. He found a family when he believed himself incapable of love. And in finding them, he found himself. That is the power of choice. That is the miracle of belonging. That is what it means to love, completely and without reservation, forever and a day.